Good morning, team. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. You're on the LinkedIn webinar. Myself, Matt Hayward, and David Lee joining me as our guest speaker, talking about the Essential Eight, cybersecurity and the Essential Eight, and as it's titled, what every small business should know. So what I want to touch on first is just a quick introduction to myself and David. I'm going to throw on a PowerPoint presentation, but I promise you it won't be one of these super boring death by PowerPoint presentations. But let me share my screen. And again, thanks for joining us. Let me just share my screen. David, can you see my screen all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Sort of fun fact, fun story. I remember once I was in the webinar and it was a few of us, and then the person shared their screen, and then nobody could see the screen. It was just him talking, and it was one of those webinars where you couldn't actually like unmute your microphone. It was set like that, so we're all like madly typing in the chat, and we're like, "We can't see a webinar. What's going on?" And then it went for like 30 minutes, and I was like the last person in the group at the end, and I could tell at the end of his webinar, poor guy, you could tell by the voice, like all the participants had left except me, and I was like, "I have a question." I couldn't see it in the webinar. Oh, it was quite funny. So team, my name is Matt Hayward. I'm from an IT support company from Blackguard. Yes, we are IT nerds, and I've got the pleasure of David Lee joining us from the Safer Internet Project. He's the CEO of the Safer Internet Project. David, tell us a bit about yourself, the Safer Internet Project, and what do you guys do?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to have a chat with you, mate. My name is David. I'm from the Safer Internet Project, as we just said, and I've been working in the cybersecurity industry for roughly 18 years now, so a little bit of time under my belt. Primarily, the objective of the Safer Internet Project is education for people who want to get into the industry of cybersecurity. So I give them learning materials as well as one-on-one guidance to give them a foot in the door, essentially, of experience, hands-on experience to work through and eventually get a job in the industry. We also do a little bit of outsourced work in the cybersecurity domain, primarily with compliance and offensive security.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, my PowerPoint presentation's not working. There you go. Here we go. Classic. Did it go next? There we go, perfect. And just to address the elephant in the room, David has a far cooler profile picture than me. I've got a boring sort of photo, and David looking pretty cool and pretty smart there. So, it still hurts you up a little bit, but that's okay. I guess just to cover the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about, the essential eight, and I'm sure kind of many people on this webinar have probably heard about the essential eight, and I actually Googled this and I said, directly from the horse's mouth from the essential eight website, the Australian Securities Directorate. What's the definition of what actually is it? And this is the definition they gave. The Australian Securities Directorate developed prioritized mitigation strategies in the form of strategies to mitigate cybersecurity incidents to help organizations protect themselves against various cybersecurity threats. The most effective of these mitigation strategies are the essential eight. And it's kind of funny. I don't know about you, Dave, but this is the kind of issue sometimes I have with the cybersecurity or maybe the IT landscape in general, right? Like that definition, yeah, okay, I guess it makes sense to us, right? But I don't know, like when I think about small businesses, it's not super clear, right? Like, do you find when you talk to your customers still like still a big black hole in terms of when you talk about cybersecurity? There's like sometimes you get the deer in the headlight lights look. Like, do you find sometimes it's a challenge just to educate people on, I suppose, what they need to be concerned about, or maybe more broadly, like what is cybersecurity?
Absolutely. The discussion of what is cybersecurity before we even getting to the discussion of exactly what the Essential Eight controls and helps to mitigate against is it's always a bit of a learning curve and discussion that takes place between myself and the customer. It is one of those things that, like you said, on the website, it does make a lot of sense to us. But when you then dive into the controls and have a look at each of the essential 8 pillars, the 8 different overarching controls, that's where it starts getting into the nitty-gritty of exactly what needs to be performed on an organization to be able to achieve a maturity level on the essential 8.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I think, yeah, the essential 8, if I say what's a simple version, I would say, look, it's a link of strategies, right, to protect
Exactly.
your organizations. And we're going to touch on in a second. And there are so many standards out there in terms of, hey, how do I keep my organization secure? Like, what do I need to be concerned about? And I think the Essential 8 is probably a really good baseline, right? In terms of there has to be some form of standard out there that at least gives us a baseline of security, that we have a number of check marks or a framework we can tick against to go, cool, I'm achieving these things. So, I'm achieving a form of security against all the other backdrops, which sort of, I guess, brings me to the next point in terms of what it encompasses. Like, what are the key areas that we talk about the Essential 8, right? And I've got like a live demo shortly that I'm going to bring up in terms of the report that you've done for us, David, about the Essential 8, on what those areas are. But I guess as an overview, the 8 sort of key areas on the Essential 8, is patching applications, making sure our applications and our workstations are up to date, and our operating systems, whether it's Windows or Apple, making sure we've got multi-factor authentication against all of our systems that we use, restricting the privileges of administrative privileges. So do I want my everyday staff members to be able to install applications on their workstation, whatever application they want? Probably not. If we can restrict that. Application control, managing applications we only have a set of applications that we can install for our business and nothing else. Restricting Microsoft Office macros, user application hardening, and the regular backups of our data. Those are the kind of the 8 key areas of the Essential 8 that we want to focus on. Sort of funny. I'm not sure if I would lean towards one being easier than the other, but I think I find the most that probably falls apart in most organizations that we come across. I think the application control is probably a big one. Like, we see a lot where every user basically has administrative privileges on their workstations to install applications, and they do that because I guess it can be a bit of a painful experience, or it's more laborious, right? If you've got to contact the IT department, get it approved and go through it. But it's an important part of the process. But I find that the most time when we come across companies that everyone or a lot of people, a lot more people have access to their workstations to install stuff than they shouldn't. I'd be keen on your thoughts, though, David. What, like, do you come across something in your travels that on the Essential 8 is sort of more lax in companies or more to harder control?
Sure. Yeah, there's usually three that are the main standout points. The first one being multi-factor authentication. A lot of people think they have it configured or configured correctly in line with what the Essential 8 outlines, whereas a lot of the time they may not. There are ways to quickly implement that, which is good, and I firmly believe that multi-factor authentication is something that is absolutely required. Application control as well, like you said, the local administrative rights on computers is the main one. A lot of people do have local admin rights on their computers, which is it makes life easier for them to install applications and go ahead and doing that. But also in relation to restricting administrative privileges, they sort of go hand in hand, where one is about being able to install applications, but also having, for example, global admins across user accounts. Those are the main ones that I see, as well as finally backups. Backups are essential. They're in the Essential 8 for a reason, and a lot of people don't have uh, backups, or maybe not enough backup for when things go wrong. Some people do, they'll have backups for 30 days, for example, which is good until you need something older than 30 days, which that's sort of the main ones that I see across Essential 8 audits is having a look at, how long do your backups go for? Do you have local administrative rights to install anything on your computer? These sort of items are things that you really need to dive into and understand the risk behind why they're included in the Essential 8. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And there is like a plethora of standards, right? So, one of the questions I hear a lot is, well, like what standard should I align to? Like, you hear so many acronyms, and I kind of feel I kind of feel sorry for companies out there by this. And what I mean by that is that, as we both know, hey David, it's like hard enough as it is, right? Keeping on top of the latest and greatest, and in the tech space, it moves so fast, and there's a number of frameworks, there's a number of standards. And then if you deep dive, so if you talk to lawyers or if you talk to financial accountancy firms or medical clinics, there's additional requirements for the storage of that sensitive data, right? So there's additional legislation they've got to worry about. So and we could really go down a rabbit hole of an alphabet soup, right, in terms of so many standards to align to the NIST and the MITRE and the ISO standards and like the PCI, and like it just keeps going. And then the question I got is, well, like how what should I align to, right? And people, I suppose, or companies who are just starting this process, um, where they're looking at their footprint in terms of their security and what they should be doing. I kind of always say to them, I think the Essential 8 is a gateway to all of that, right? So I don't
Exactly.
necessarily say that it's the end all be all. I don't say, hey, like Essential 8, set it up and then you're going to be fine from there. I say, look, it is the perfect stepping stone to enter into that world of security. And I don't think anybody ever said, hey, cybersecurity made my life easier, but it's important, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
100%. Yeah, it is a stepping stone as far as compliance frameworks are concerned. Almost think of it as like an overarching standard for Australian businesses. So it's the first one you would look into having completed before going towards maybe a more industry specific compliance framework. So for example, if you're processing payments, you're going to be looking at PCI DSS, or if you're, applying for some of the larger government tenders, sometimes they do ask for ISO 27001, at least at a readiness stage. So it's a nice stepping stone in regards to different frameworks that exist on a more global scale, or specifically for an industry scale, to have the Essential 8 done, because it does cover those Essential 8 items towards getting you that next level of compliance if that is something that you require. So it's a good stepping stone, but it's also a good baseline of security to have across your organization. So if you have, for example, you go through the Essential 8, you're going to identify potential risks across your organization's policies, procedures that currently exist, and then you say, okay, I'm going to work towards maturity level 2 or 3. This is then going to increase my security posture and better protect my organization while also keeping me compliant with an Australian standard, which is then a good stepping stone towards the bigger, and maybe not better, but definitely bigger, and more precise frameworks that exist.
That's a great point as well. Is that the Essential 8? It is developed by the Australian Securities Director or the Australian government essentially. It is an
Yep,
Australian standard. Is there a standard for other countries? Probably, maybe. I don't know. But
there
the
is. Yeah,
standard
yeah.
is there really for like the
Yeah,
US and
yeah.
stuff? Like what's the
Yeah,
equivalent?
so the US, they usually operate on SOC 1 or SOC 2. The UK go by one called the UK Cybersecurity Essentials. They're all very similar. They have different names and different controls and different pillars, but they do have relationships between each. So, for example, if you had a business that was operating in Australia, the US, and the UK. The Essential 8 could be, if you're operating across multiple places, you could have the Essential 8 to start with Australia, then go for the UK Cybersecurity Essentials, and then have a look at, SOC 1 or SOC 2, or even potentially one of the, sorry, someone just messaged me saying the link is broken for the LinkedIn. So yeah, for this presentation. So I don't know if that's something that's not working on your side.
Oh, got
But
it.
yeah. But yeah, they're going to be looking across those different standards for each country, because there is a standard across each country.
Interesting. And I suppose if you had, yeah, if you had, well, data or maybe offices that span geographically the UK, US, and Australia, you need to be concerned with all three of those models, depending on the country you're in, to meet those standards, I suppose, for where you're geographically based.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all about where your company is set up and which standards you need to align with for the governing body of businesses inside that country.
Interesting, interesting. And you touched on something before that I want to touch on in terms of the sort of a live demo in terms of what we got, because I want to just touch on this report that you did for us. And I've just stripped out any, sensitive data from the client that it was done for, but I'm just going to open this report up now. And it's a fairly lengthy document, right? Which you would expect, and on a topic such as cybersecurity, you would expect to be fairly, fairly involved, right? And you touched on something earlier about the maturity levels of the essential eight. We touched on the 8 steps in terms of covering the essential eight, but inside the essential eight, there's maturity levels from 0 to 4. And I'm just going to show our audience this for a second. So we've obviously got the report you've done, the executive summary, and all the 8 steps that cover the essential eight that we spoke about. But if we scroll down, we talk about the maturity level, which is a good segue here. Can you detail for us? So what do the maturity levels mean? So going from 0 to 1, 2, 3, what do the different levels represent and mean essentially?
The different maturity levels align with, firstly, what controls are available on that organization based on their license level, that's a tricky one to navigate, because with greater licensing, you can have greater maturity level. What you would normally do is start with assuming your maturity level 0, working towards maturity level 1. Maturity level 1 is the sort of as it goes here, maturity level 0, not compliant at all. Maturity level 1 is your baseline maturity level. 2 and 3 is, you're working towards a higher level of maturity. How these relate to what you should be aiming for is, if you're applying for, say, for example, again, a government tender, and they say, organizations who are applying for this tender must be in line with maturity level 2, then they would have to complete the controls and gain licensing to be able to implement maturity level 2. So each of the maturity levels comes with an increase of exactly what controls under each of the essential 8 pillars exist. So if, for example, you're doing patch applications on maturity level 1 versus maturity level 2, there's a few more items that need to be checked against for maturity level 2 compared to maturity level 1. The short version, the easier to understand version of this is that as you go up the ranks of maturity level, you do need to implement more controls, because you're then more mature as far as cybersecurity controls are concerned.
It's sort of it's sort of funny this, right? Because I heard on the grapevine, and I don't know if this is true or not. It was a rumor, and I suppose there might be some truth to this rumor that Australia's trying to increase their cybersecurity footprint, right? Like Australia's pretty massive in terms of number of attacks that we get, and you know, the phishing emails and the phone calls, and we always hear this a lot, right, in terms of especially the elderly or the vulnerable who are affected mostly by these attacks, right? And we hear the stats all the time about the billions of dollars lost from attacks that could have been prevented. And then there's also the question, all right, well, you know, what are the telecommunications companies doing to protect us as citizens of Australia, and our data? And someone said, I can't remember where I heard it from, but someone said they believe that it will become a mandatory requirement for companies in Australia, commercial and not-for-profit, and any companies dealing with customer data in the future, where they have to be level 0 certified or achieving level 0 in the essential 8. Now, how they're going to mandate that, I don't know. But do you, I mean, do you foresee that there might be a minimum benchmark that companies need to meet, you know, prior to becoming companies or dealing with data?
Yes, yeah, I have heard these same rumors. It was mostly in relation to another framework called the SMB 1001, which was a minimum level of certification. And it's that certification is similar to if you were to apply for uh, cybersecurity insurance. So you wanted coverage for cybersecurity on your insurance policy. You would need to have then to prove that when you do that insurance policy, you have to go through a few tick boxes to understand what is required from your organization. It's very much a self-attestation, though, from what I see it being implemented as, which has a good and a bad side. One is that it opens the good side is that it opens a conversation of cybersecurity and where a business should start with. The bad side is that when someone fills that out, if they don't have a lot of knowledge of cybersecurity controls, they might think they have something without actually checking. And because it's a self-attestation, you just sort of tick it off, say, yes, 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 I've got it. So this is where the Essential 8 would then come into play as the standard, where you would actually have a security professional go through and review what's really required. What do you need to do as far as policies and procedures are concerned? Which then on maturity level 0 is, I guess it's not compliant as far as the Essential 8 is concerned, but it's a good stepping stone to see what you need to do to get to level 1 or 2. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of the report here. So obviously we've got the recommendations in terms of what we found in this report, and I suppose just to highlight what you mentioned earlier, David, is that to achieve level 1 maturity, you've got to achieve level 0 maturity first, right? So you can't go straight to level 3 if you haven't got 0, 1, or 2. And in this particular report, I remember, so we're only focusing on the level 0 controls here. And I'll explain what I mean a little bit further down. In this report, we can see there's a number of areas where need some work in terms of where they haven't achieved even level 0, what the steps are to get them up to at least level 0, and if they want to proceed further, level 1, 2, and 3. And as you mentioned, David, so to achieve level 3, I think, you know, that's the end goal, level 3. I think it's normally reserved for, like, hey, if you're working with highly sensitive material or defense material, then it may be
Exactly.
mandated from the government or the supplier that you've got to be at that level and prove
Correct.
that. And let's get into the actual nuts and bolts here, right? So we've got the headings. So number 1, application control, and we've got 8 headings, right, that represent the 8 key areas. And it's sort of funny. This is where I kind of feel sorry for business owners, and I'm going to frame that with a story in a second. Excuse me, but just to give you an example, so there is one control, right, on the application control to achieve level 0 as a benchmark. This check needs to be satisfied. So the execution of executables, software libraries, scripts, installers, compiled HTML, application control, panel applets is prevented on workstations from within standard user profiles and temporary folders used by the operating system, web browsers, and email clients. Now, to you and I, of course, David, that makes sense, but that's a fairly technical thing, right? So when we see this, we say, okay, cool. So preventing of applications running on workstations that shouldn't be able to run. That's basically what this means. But this is the actual definition from the Essential 8. And we can see in your notes here, which is in honest to goodness everyday English, there's no whitelisting policy in place from Windows Defender. And we identified it from the Microsoft Compliance Dashboard. That's where you identified this area. And the reason I feel sorry for businesses for is that I totally get it. It's technical. This document, it's lengthy, right? It's fairly lengthy,
Oh yeah.
and it's complex. I think it's technical and it's complex, and especially if you don't work in the IT industry, I can see how your eyes would probably glass over unless you've got someone like you or I, David, to walk the client through in terms of what they mean and to really highlight how to fix and just, I guess, what it actually means. I remember a story a while ago in the early days of running a company. I remember, like, I hate doing the books, right? Like, we in the early days of running a company, I didn't have a bookkeeper. It was me, and reconciling our books and making sure the transactions lined up. And I honestly can't stand it. I hate it. And that was the first function I outsourced to a bookkeeper when we could early on. And I remember the mistake I made early on is I said to the bookkeeper, cool, you handle all this stuff, go for it. And I didn't want to have any involvement. I had the blinders on. I just wanted to close my eyes and let them do it because I honestly cannot stand bookkeeping. It just, I don't know, it just gives me nightmares still. What happened though, and it wasn't really bookkeeper's fault. After a year, I was looking at the books, and tax time came, and I was like, oh, I'm paying more tax than what I would expect. And the accountant and I went through it, and all these transactions had been reconciled under different categories and things that were wrong. So I was paying like thousands and thousands of dollars in extra tax that I shouldn't have been, simply because I closed my eyes and let the bookkeeper did it. And what I realized from that day on is that you can't abdicate responsibility, right? You need to at least have an awareness of what things mean. So when information is being told to you, you at least have a conceptual understanding of what you know and what you don't know. And I think this is the same for the Essential 8 for companies. Like, you don't really need to know the absolute technical nuts and bolts and ins and outs of every single step, but I think you need to have an awareness of what they mean, right? Which is where someone like you or I come in, David, to highlight these areas. You have to be aware of the risks and what they mean, because God forbid if something goes wrong, well, it's on you, right? Does that sound harsh? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Am I really throwing a baby out of with the bathwater there? But what do you reckon?
No, I think that's fairly accurate. It's this report is, I mean, it is quite lengthy and it is very much in depth, but that's exactly what they're asking for, as far as, and them, I mean the AECSC or even ASD in relation to this report, the governing body of who monitors companies undertaking an Essential 8. So it's the job that we're kind of doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, is the translation of all of this technical jargon into an easy to understand way of, what is patching applications. Here's each of the controls as far as patching applications is concerned. How do you align with the Essential 8 against these strategies? So it's the main job is really communication of this report once completed, to say, like, this is where you're sort of falling behind and this is what needs to be done to get you over the line. And
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
I think that's but you're right, it is it is a lengthy report, and it is something that I think is quite important to translate into a someone who can understand exactly what you're saying in maybe not layman's terms. I hate the term layman terms, but I mean something a little bit less technical deep dive, which is really what this report is.
Definitely, definitely. And we patch applications, and a lot of it makes sense as well. But that we've got, hey, vulnerability scanner is used at least daily to identify missing patches, and it's important to note. So in this the second heading here, the patch applications, the second key area for the Essential 8 is that we've got all these steps for level 0. It's important to note, though, even though we've got 5 rows that are effective, and then we've got 2 rows that are ineffective, you still achieve level 0. So it doesn't mean that, yep, you're satisfied. If you've got one that's in the red, that's not effective, then you can't, I suppose, get a green tick for the patch application step, right? Does that make sense? So you might have, yeah, cool, we're 95% there, but from the Essential 8 perspective, you're you're either 0% or 100%.
So
You're
painful.
effective and totally, or you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, you just need to fail one on each Essential 8 pillar to fail the entire pillar for that section, which is, I mean, it's a bit rough, but at least it then shows you like, look, you're so close. You're 99% there. Just need to do one extra step here, and you'll be over the line on this control. So it's good and bad. It is a bit rough though, I have to admit. Every time I go through an Essential 8, I'm like, it's almost guaranteed to be level 0,
Yeah,
because there's if you just need to fail one and that's it. Um,
absolutely.
it's so painful, but yeah.
Absolutely, and so that's fascinating. So with the reports that you've done, would you say in your experience, the reports you've done, most times it comes across your desk, most times organizations are not even achieving level 0, like there's work to be done.
Correct. Yep. I've done probably a few hundred Essential 8 reports in my time. I think there's probably, I could count them on one hand, how many people have achieved the maturity level that they set out to get, which is usually 1 or maybe 2. So yeah, most people don't get the maturity level that they're potentially going after on the first go. Uh, the the thing with the Essential 8 though is that and most compliance frameworks, is that it's more or less an ongoing uh, compliance audit, where you do the report once and you get your where you're currently at uh, view. Then you go, okay, I want to get to this level. I'm going to do it again and get to the next level. So then I want to actually achieve these items. So then you can go back and see, okay, in the last report, this organization was almost compliant on pretty much every section. Some sections they were completely compliant. So it's just then checking over the previous ones just to make sure that nothing has changed as far as configuration or policy procedure is concerned. And then working towards the ones where they weren't effective. So is an ineffective implementation status, and going, okay, look, things have changed. Some policies have been implemented here that do get them over the line for the implementation status. So for example, like multi-factor authentication, the screen that we're currently on, if an organization had a similar result as this, they have multi-factor authentication, but it's not across all of these controls or strategies, then they go back after receiving the report and get these items mitigated or implemented, then were to do it again in a few months' time, or immediately, depending on the, I guess, appetite for security and compliance, then you could mark off and say, look, these have been implemented. Let's get you over the line here. So it's good in a way that it does give you that insight into where your compliance status is currently at. Remembering that compliance is something that is fairly ongoing. It's not something you do sort of once off and go, okay, well, we failed the Essential 8. That's it. That was great. It's more, okay, this is where we're currently at on the Essential 8. We're almost at maturity level 1. Let's implement these controls and see if we can get to level 1, and from there potentially work towards level 2, or at least sustaining the procedures and controls for maturity level 1. Keep in mind that systems and processes do change over time, especially with systems like Microsoft 365. where the licensing does change. For example, the Teams licensing for E3 accounts. If you have an E3 account, previously Teams was included. Now it's not. So the communication section of maturity level 2 would have changed just by a simple change by Microsoft changing a license feature. So it's in this way, when you think of it in this way, there is uh, a requirement to, or maybe not a requirement, but it's a good idea to continue doing Essential 8 audits on an ongoing basis.
It's sort of funny, and I know we've got 10 minutes left, and we've got I want to leave at least 5 minutes for Q&A. But you've touched on an area that's in sort of one of my next slides, and it's kind of funny you mentioned that, and it was it's sort of funny. I did this last month on the Microsoft Secure Score, and I had this slide, and I sometimes I got to check myself because I don't want to get my high horse, but it sort of touches on what you said before about cybersecurity isn't a static thing, right? It isn't one of those things where you go, I've done Essential 8, from now and forever, I'm going to be secure. It's a dynamic, it's a moving, breathing thing. And I got to say, and this may be a personal opinion, but I got to say, the term itself, cybersecurity, I think is a relatively new term. But and you remember back in the days, David, I call them the wild west days of when internet was just really starting to take off, and e-commerce security was always a concern. Like it was always there. And everything we'd done and back when I was at corporate and the jobs I had, we always had to worry about security and everything we did in our network and the computers, we made sure that security was at the forefront of what we did. But we didn't call it cybersecurity. We just called it security. And
Yep.
again, a personal opinion, but I think the term cybersecurity is only a relatively, newish 5-year term that was
Pretty much, yeah.
born out of everything is moved to the cloud right nowadays. We can log onto our browser in Chrome, whatever, log onto the system, and all of our applications in Office 365 as well are in the cloud. And then the term, I don't know, cybersecurity came out of that, but it's always been around. Like it has been around since day dot.
It has, yeah.
Right? Like I don't know. I mean, it's been around. It's been around
I
forever.
think so. Yeah. So before doing cybersecurity, specifically cybersecurity, my main role was as a network security engineer, managing firewalls and then, network security on switches and routers. And that was almost just a an offshoot of networking at the time, or systems administration, which is, I think, why a lot of organizations who are employing internally a cybersecurity professional prefer someone with sysadmin or network engineering experience. But in relation to cloud security and how long has cybersecurity been around, it's a really tricky question because it has kind of been around forever. It's just evolved as IT, the industry, has evolved. So, like you said, first way back, there was network engineers who implemented switches and routers. Then networks got a little bit more complicated, where there were VLANs, and I'll get a little bit technical here, but I'll try and stay on course of not being too technical. And yeah, so we had the virtual LANs, and then implementing security controls over networks. Then came along firewalls, implementing the rule sets on firewalls of what could come in and out of an organization's network in an office. But then people started working remotely. So then you have to implement controls over devices on an overarching and usually cloud-focused system, similar to Microsoft 365. So cybersecurity it's a tricky one because it kind of covers all of those things. It's a little bit of uh, well, kind of, but not really at the same time. So it does cover, do you have endpoint protection, also known as antivirus? Do you have controls over the what users can access on a file server or a SharePoint directory? Who has access there? Should they have access? things like this. So it's not just now, network security is network security and cybersecurity is cybersecurity. They all kind of merged together, but are still separate job roles or avenues to explore within the cybersecurity domain. And I know that was a very long-winded response. So I'm trying to keep it down into a digestible area here. But for just going back to the essential 8 slightly on controls, what I see and what I believe will be implemented soon, because there is another compliance framework that's been added recently around Copilot and AI. I believe that will be implemented into the Essential 8 at some point in the very near future. And it is in some areas already, specifically with license features. But, and that's it. I'm trying to give you a bit of a segue here into a point at the end of this slide, which is that, yeah, AI is a double-edged sword because it does come with controls that should be implemented on who and what and where and how.
I remember once I'd purchased another IT company, so we got to their clients, and I was going doing the rounds, introducing myself to the directors. And we had a different price point to this other company, and our main focus, and always has been, not just the IT support, but cybersecurity. I remember I spoke to, I'm not going to mention any names, any company names. I remember I sat down and spoke to a gentleman, and he flat out point blank said to me, I think he goes, I think cybersecurity is a conspiracy theory. I think that the companies that employ antiviruses and the IT companies that support them are the same organizations and companies that deploy malware in order to fix it. So basically what he was saying is that I believe that you guys create a problem and then you charge us to fix it. And it took me all the my effort not to just kind of burst out laughing, but I had to take a step back and I had to think about just for a second what his perspective was. So that was his belief, right? And right or wrongly, that was his belief. And I just took a step back and thought about this. And now I've had the benefit, obviously, both of us have, you and I, Dave, of working for a long time in the IT space. But I had to think about his perspective, and I thought, you know what? It is annoying that the cost in cybersecurity has gone up. Like I get it. Like nobody ever has ever said, like, I'm so glad I've got to pay for an additional tool, like, or I'm so glad I've got a different area to protect my data. Or I love putting in codes, MFA codes to my applications. I love that. Like nobody says that, right? And our toolkit that we have installed and deployed to our clients has increased about 4 times over the space of 5 years, right? At least a 4-time increase of prices to us that we pay for. And I think what he was, I don't know, maybe I didn't explore this fully, but I got the feeling that with this particular gentleman I'm talking about, he was just annoyed by that, right? He was just annoyed by, man, like every week that comes out, I'm just being bombarded with different attacks, and there's got to be a story behind it as to, like what's actually happening because my costs are increasing. Then you're asking me to install a different stuff to keep me safe. And I think that's what his real cause from concern was. And this was just another new player, new IT company, because we'd purchased him through another company, and we're sort of coming in saying, hey, your price is going to increase because we want to keep your data protected. And he was like, well, I haven't been hacked yet, and I've been in business for 5 years, so why should I? And then we all know the story, right? You need insurance the most when something happens, and God forbid you don't have it, right? But I thought I'd kind of just leave our audience that story. We are 2 minutes left. I think I'll hand it across to the Q&A to any questions on the chat. Give it a couple of seconds in case anyone's got any burning questions. And sorry for slightly over. We've got 2 minutes in the meeting.
While we're waiting for any questions to come through, the key word in that story is yet. It's not if, but when.
Yeah, I know.
Because
I know.
yeah, malicious actors do consistently scan as machines come available through the internet. They're looking for them.
Yeah, I know. It's
yeah.
rough. And I look, I laugh.
Tough.
I laugh, but I laugh, but I nervously laugh as well in a way because I probably similar to yourself. I have have been firsthand in board meetings, and I've been, next to the director when he's had to sack his entire staff or most of his staff because they got breached and they can't pay the bills. I remember one story I had, the poor guy, he was beside himself as director, and I was next to him for support from the technical side just to explain what happened. He was beside himself. He couldn't really bring himself to talk to his staff. There was, I think it's about 25 and we're on the stage there, and he couldn't bring himself to say to his team that he'd been breached, he'd been hacked, he's been announcing redundancies, and he's going to close his doors effectively. So I don't blame him for this, but I was on stage next to him to just I explained some of the technical, not that anybody cared, right? They're losing their jobs. They didn't care about the technical side, but he kind of he couldn't control himself, and he got very emotional. He went off stage at the last second. So it was just me on stage, and I had to announce to his entire workforce that what had happened. And yeah, I had to announce that the business was shutting down as a result of a breach that he called us on out of the blue because something had happened. It was a bad day. It was a really bad day for everyone. So even though I laugh, when people have their, I guess, these kind of blasé attitudes towards cybersecurity, I've been in the room when people have lost their jobs, and
Yeah, it's quite a serious thing.
you've
Yeah,
got to tell the kids.
jokes aside, it is serious business. It could be the be all and end all if you are. And I don't want to instill the the fear in here, but the risk is real, and it is something absolutely worth investigating, which is exactly why the Australian government has implemented this level of security for business to undertake so that they can understand the threat, potential threat, as well as how to protect themselves against those threats. That's the main point of pretty much every compliance framework that exists is to help people stay protected and not be in those situations. So yeah.
Absolutely. David, we've done such a fantastic job. We haven't any questions, and we're all singing, all dancing here. Hey, thanks to everyone for joining us today. So on the screen is the details of myself, the black card IT support IT nerds, and the handsome self and the absolute wealth of experience in cybersecurity, Mr. David Lee from the Safer Internet Project. If you'd like to reach either of us, our details are on the screen now. We're both LinkedIn fiends. As they say, you can never have too many friends on LinkedIn. So if you'd like to connect with us over across LinkedIn as well, LinkedIn are just strangers ready to become friends, right, David? So we can
I
also
love LinkedIn and all of my 22,000 friends.
Indeed. Hey, David, thanks again for your time. Really appreciate your time and joining us today. And everyone who's watching us, really appreciate your time. Have an awesome rest of the week. And any questions like I mentioned, reach out to either of us. Be more than happy to help, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much.
See you, team.